Good evening and welcome to Unfiltered. Tonight, the courtroom clash between the MK party and the ANC. Before we kick off, let's take a look at what ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula had to say about this matter.
If Zuma wants to form a party, it is fine. He can call it Msholozi. He can call it Zuma. He can call it whatever he wants to call it. But we will never leave him to run away with MK. Because Umkhonto we belong to the African National Congress.
The ANC appeared in the Electoral Court of South Africa in Bloemfontein today to challenge the registration of the Umkhonto we party. According to the ANC, there are procedural errors in the way the MK party was registered. Good evening once again and welcome to Unfiltered. I'm your host, Sizwe Mpofu Walsh. The Umkhonto we party is urging the Electoral Court to uphold its registration. And so tonight we ask, will the MK party make the ballot? Joining us for this important conversation from the ANC, we have Mahlengi Bengu, who is the party spokesperson, Ntambulo Ndlela, spokesperson of Umkhonto we party, and our journalist Kani Mapanga will give us a wrap of today's events. And it's to Kani that we'll go first. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Kani. And I suppose, could I begin by asking you about the atmosphere in the courtroom today?
Well, good evening, Sizwe, and to reviewers. Thank you for having me. Well, the atmosphere in the courtroom today was actually quite cordial. However, we did see on the outskirts of the electoral court that there were quite a number of MK supporters, as well as ANC supporters who were advancing their causes in this big contentious issue of whether the Electoral Commission has the powers or whether it is lawful for the Electoral Commission to register a political party on a supplemented application. So we've heard that central question there being heard in the review that was brought to the Electoral Court is this legality question and the implications of this answer on the upcoming general elections as well as any other elections to come in South Africa.
Could you crystallize the dispute for us?
Sure, Sizwe. Well, the dispute here is really the application for Umkhonto we for them to be registered. It's quite interesting hearing the arguments that were placed before the court by the ANC, who center this matter on the lawfulness of free and fair elections, and if this is allowed, what that will have for other elections. But when you hear the ANC speaking on this matter on political platforms, it becomes a different conversation about Umkhonto we and how it is linked to the ANC, its heritage, its history, and how the former president should not be allowed to use this name to further advance any of his other political ambitions. But I think, Caesar, it's also important to lay out the foundation of how the MK party actually became to be a registered party in the first place. And we have to start in June 2023, when it actually applied to the Commission for registration as a political party in respect of the entire Republic. So on the 9th of June, they published a notice of their application for registration in the Gazette. The ANC actually failed to object in the prescribed manner to the MK party's application for registration within 14 days after the publication notice. So then on the 12th, Mr. Jabulani Khumalo, who registered the party, then communicated to the IEC that he just needs guidance on the sort of steps that he needs to do. They respond on the 13th and let him know that once he's received that vet, he can now submit his application. On the 20th, the Commission further advised Umkhonto we that its publication of the notice of application for registration in the Gazette was incorrect as it reflected two logos. We know that the ANC said that the publication of two logos created confusion, as a reasonable reader would not know which symbol to object to. So then on the 22nd, the Commission sent another email to the MK, advising them in order to meet the requirements for the registration of a political party, in addition to the documents that had already been submitted. So this had to do with the Zeta Foundation, where they submitted 1,000 qualified voters. However, the IEC was only able to verify about 725 of those. So they asked them to respond within 14 days. So in June of 2023, we're still in the same month, MK publishes a further notice for the application of registration, which included a single logo. Again, the ANC failed to object in the prescribed manner to Umkhonto we application for registration within 14 days. and then also doesn't explain in the application that we saw in the electoral court why it didn't do so. Then, of course, this objection, I guess, this main contention in this application is this August 2023 letter that the Commission then sends to the MK. It's a letter signed by the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, dated 4th of August 2023, where he explains where they fall short in the Speed Foundation. He then invites them to further submit that application. So now the ANC used that as a rejection letter and said that once that letter was sent, the MK party's application had been nullified at that point, and there was nothing to consider further, or rather there was no application before them at that point, and that they needed to submit a fresh application. So the IEC is saying that in these normal cases, these supplemented applications can be considered, and there is provisions for that to be accommodated in the Electoral Act for that to take place. So this is a different interpretation that we're seeing before the Electoral Court on the issue of whether the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer had that power or that public function to consider that application once it had been quote-unquote amended, because in the ANC's view, once that letter was sent, it was now nullified.
That's a really helpful summary, Kenny, because so much has been happening in this case, and the timelines can become so complicated. But it's really useful to just crystallize exactly what happened there. And I think what's also useful is to distinguish this case from another case, which I believe will be heard on the 27th, which is about the trademark and the logo. So this is about how the MK party was registered and whether that was appropriately done by the IEC. There's a separate case also between the ANC and MK about whether the MK party's insignia, etc., draw unduly from the ANC's own history.
Yes, well, I think that's where the confusion was created initially, because the first objection, once we heard of this MK party that had come into fruition, the first objection by the ANC was the use of the name and the logo. And we understand that was raised in the internal commission's process, the appeals process. Then, remember, a couple of months passed. Then we see that major 16th of December announcement by the former president, in which he throws his weight behind the MK party and announces that he will be campaigning for them. Then now we see this application where there is a different ground that is raised now, and it centers on the August letter. And now we know that this separate issue of copyright will now be addressed at the Durban High Court on the 27th of March.
Absolutely. There was a great deal of argument around even whether this case could be heard by the court. And so on the one hand, there's this question about the timelines and whether the IEC acted appropriately, but it seemed like much of the argument today focused on preliminary questions and whether this was in fact the right court to even hear the matter.
Well, the processes are quite clear, Caesar, especially with these institutions that are designed to deal with specific matters. So if you look at the Electoral Act, it accommodates electoral disputes or electoral concerns, however you want to phrase it, through these mechanisms, that is the objections, the appeals, and the reviews process within the Electoral Commission. Before you approach the specialist court, you actually have to establish that there is a dispute or there is a decision that has been made that is, quote-unquote, unlawful. So what we understand is that the IEC has explained that the appeal process that was initially lodged by the ANC, there was a decision there which rejected their appeal. And at that point, the ANC had abandoned that appeal. And some time had passed, and now we're at the electoral court. So it kind of undermines that process or that review mechanism that is already set if you're not going to utilize it and you just jump straight to the electoral court. So that is exactly what the IEC is trying to explain, is that there is no decision that is before the court at this stage that is reviewable. But there are mechanisms that are in place to deal with these types of disputes and concerns within the electoral system.
Yes, and I wonder, what do you think, where we go from here, legally speaking? I know there was reference made by counsel for the ANC, Advocate Sidiso Ramokgale, on potentially taking this matter to the High Court if they didn't succeed in the Electoral Court. Do you have any sense of where to from here from a legal perspective? and when we might even expect judgment?
Yes, well, the Electoral Court moved quite quickly, and we are in a critical period. Even though judgment is reserved, we can understand that they'll be coming with that decision quite soon. And we know that elections are going to be held on the 29th of May. And the MK party, which I understand would be the most affected if the ANC was successful in their bid, would need that answer and that clarity and also that guidance to the Electoral Commission and the IEC ahead of the 2024 general elections. Because at this stage, we understand that the MK party did make their submissions for the March 8th deadline. They contend that they are registered in a valid manner to contest the 2024 general elections. And we also know that there are subtle threats in the air looming about what the possibility could be if the MK party was not allowed to contest. So I think clarity is needed in this matter and is needed quite quickly prior to the country going to those May elections.
Absolutely. And can you just situate this for us and talk about the stakes of this case for the election? Because when we look at some of the polls that have come out, this is a crucial election both for the MK party but also for the ANC. And whether the MK party can contest or not would seem to be quite an important tipping point for this election and its outcome.
Absolutely, Caesar. Well, if you look at the MK party and some of the inroads it's been making in the KZN province, I mean, one could understand that they could be quite spurring from the MK party in these current elections, as KZN is kind of being seen as the political battlefield. And we understand that if the ANC is successful in invalidating the registration of the MK, the March 8th deadline for the IEC in its election timetable has already passed. So while they may be able to start a new, fresh application, it will not be within the correct time frame for the 2024 general elections. And those consequences could be serious for the MK party, because we can see from court papers is that both parties, being the MK and the IEC, were in communication about how they could meet the requirements to contest elections. We have the IEC stating that these are the facts and this is how we ensure that this party was registered and followed our constitutional mandate. And then we, of course, have those talks of what the possible implications, could be for the MK party. And we've seen those threats from the interim youth leader, Bongikosi Khanile, who has charged that there won't be any elections in this country if they are not allowed to contest. So there's a lot at stake. We're not talking about just any party. It's a party that is endorsed by a current ANC member, former ANC President Jacob Zuma, and we've seen the type of inroads it's been making in KZN and the type of support it's been garnering on the ground. So there are serious implications, and the stakes are high for the Electoral Court to come to a determination on this matter quite speedily.
Kenny, thanks so much for helping us pass through this complicated maze of cases and simplifying it for us. We'll be back after the break to delve deeper into the court battle between the MK party and the ANC earlier today in Bloemfontein. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Unfiltered. The ANC, the IEC and the MK party squared off in court today over the registration of the MK party. Let's take a look at what former President Zuma had to say about the matter.
Kodwa maye babo abebe khona bebe mayoyana njengenkukhu inethi siyilalela ukuthi bazothini kodwa sineqiniso ukuthi sinazikhuluma iqiniso nje ikakhulukazi ngoba umlando womkhonto uyaziwa awuyona imfihlo.
And just to summarize, former President Zuma saying that they are scared, that being the ANC. However, the MK party is awaiting the judgment and they're hopeful about the outcome. We're joined now by the MK party's spokesperson, Mr. Ntlamulo Ndlela. Mr. Ndlela, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Good evening, Sidran. Good evening to the viewers.
Glad to have you. How would you characterize the dispute between the ANC, the IEC, and MK over this issue?
Yeah, so Sidran, I'm sure as you know, we as the MK are the third respondents. The first respondent being the Chief Electoral Officer, the IEC, and then us as the third respondent. Throughout the process of responding to this frivolous, desperate case by the ANC, we worked clearly very well with our attorneys, and they came with an answering affidavit that was aligned to the IEC's in response to the ANC's papers. So we're quite comfortable and confident that we mirrored, the processes and required procedures that we had to meet to get the party registered. And with that, we got a party that's registered. And mind you, we had to wait for a good, literally 2 sessions of gazetting where, we were open for any public objections, of which the ANC, in their slumber, didn't object until President Zuma announced that he's going to be campaigning for the Umkhonto weSizwe Party on December 16, 2023. That alone is telling that, this is a desperate act by the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa, to try and destabilize the will of the people. We're an organization and that will carry the people's mandate, and we will go into parliament, and we will be on that ballot, whether the ANC likes it or not. And it was very telling, just from today's presentation from their attorneys and their advocates, their legal team, that it's a totally flimsy case. They had no position, and they couldn't even respond to some of the basic questions. So we're quite confident, Caesar, especially after today.
The ANC maintained that once the IEC had, updated this registration decision, that instead of just asking you to supplement your registration papers, it should have asked you to bring an all-new application for registration, as I understand it. Why do you think that's wrong? Mr. Ndlela, I think we've lost Mr. Ndlela, but we'll make sure that we get him back as we try to connect with him in Bloemfontein. I'm sure there's a great deal of social media commentary on this issue, so let's go to some of your social media comments at the moment. We're just going to go to some of your social media comments now. Barry Martin says, the ANC is not just unhappy with the MK as a registered party on the IEC ballot, but also of Jacob Zuma's presence at the MK party, because Olile says, for me, I am hoping for the best, and also we in this country don't need more chaos. And Sanele says, if the rules of the IEC that were presented by Mr. Mpofu today are true, then it's a win for MK. No doubt about that. And finally, wow, we've got a lot of social media comments this evening. Mzuvukile says, MK party will make the ballot because the name does not clash with another registered political party. But I'm not surprised by the action of the ANC because they also like to use history to attract voters. Mr. Ndlela, just to check if we have you back.
Yes.
Great, thanks. I know connecting between provinces can be tough, but we can hear you loud and clear.
Great.
The key contention of the ANC today was that instead of merely supplementing your registration application, as I understand it, there should have been an all-new application in order for it to conform with electoral law. Why do you think that argument was wrong?
Well, look, the outcomes of that exchange between the lawyers will always be determined by the judges. But effectively, having to supplement documentation that you would have submitted and requested to submit as per the process is what we had to comply with, which we did comply with. So, I mean, again, you must remember the ANC is very desperate here to try and find some sort of loophole in the process that was followed by the IEC in registering the Umkhonto we. One thing that's also important to understand is that there are 5 other parties that received similar letters of registration, but the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa doesn't join them into this matter. Why? We received them at the same time. The parties were registered at the same time, so Umkhonto is not the only one that was registered at that point in time. So that's the big question also. Why are they not referring to the 5 other parties in terms of how they were registered? No, it's clear. This is a politicism, pure political rhetoric, and and they're going to fail at this.
What do you think are the stakes of this case? Because if the court does go against the MK party, that would have massive implications. If the court goes with the MK party and indeed the IEC, that would also have massive implications. How are you thinking of the stakes of the outcome of this case?
Well, look, Caesar, we can talk about hypothetical outcomes if that's what you'd like us to share. But that would be sharing our strategy, of how, if we at any point were to find ourselves in a situation where the outcome is not in our favor, which we doubt. We're very confident that we'll win this case, Susan. So we don't even see ourselves having to get into plan B. We got this far, had made this impact in the country, in the political landscape, by working, underground, very discreetly, and not sharing anything, and neither could we even share our strategy of even getting President Zuma announcing on the 16th of December. So everything had to be covert, and we have to continue in that manner. So I would not be able to, at this point, share off the back of a hypothetical discussion to say, well, if this were the outcome, that being a negative one, how would we respond? I want to share with you that we won't be having that conversation. We are confident that we're going to be on the ballot. We are confident that we followed the processes and the procedures, and everything was gazetted accordingly. We're confident that ANC woke up from their slumber when they realized that we're a force to be reckoned with at the last minute. A very desperate, frivolous case, and act. That we're going to be on the ballot. So the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa is really playing at politics here. They are seeing the signs of inevitability of them losing power, and that's just the reality. It's just pure politics.
There was an argument made in court today that, in general, the frontiers of democracy should be expanded. In other words, the IEC's job is not to use procedural mechanisms to prevent more and more parties to join, and that the Constitution really envisages a multi-party democracy where as many parties as possible are able to participate in the electoral system. And so the argument that you advanced today was that this is anti-democratic. Can you expand on that for us?
I heard probably 40% to 30% of what you said because of the connection.
No problem. Basically,
sure.
You advanced the argument that trying to remove you from the ballot is anti-democratic, and I wanted you to expand on why you thought that.
Look, the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa is doing exactly what the apartheid government did to the ANC when they disbanded the ANC and didn't want black people to contend for elections. This is a cut and paste, of what happened during apartheid. So how can that be democratic when we know that the Constitution then is pretty much similar to this Constitution now, which is supposed to be democratic? I mean, clearly there's a direct relationship here. Cyril Ramaphosa is clearly acting like a leader of a racist apartheid government.
Well, well, I'm gonna take you up there. We just got to cut to a break, and then we'll come back on that and some of the deeper questions about the MK party and its bursting onto the scene of South African politics. We're in conversation with its spokesperson at the moment, Mr. Nhlamulo Ndlela, after they squared off with the ANC in court in Bloemfontein today. Stick with us for this conversation after the break.
South Africa, get ready for the most anticipated election coverage of 2024. I'm Blaine Herman, and I invite you to the heart of political campaigns.
I'm Sakina Kamwendo, and we will be going beyond the headlines with in-depth discussions and insights into political party campaigns.
And that's not all, Sakina. We will be visiting your area to give you a chance to engage authorities firsthand.
So South Africa, don't miss out. Join us here on Elections 360. Stay informed and stay connected.
Elections 360 South Africa every Sunday from 7 until 8 p.m. on SABC2 and SABC News.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. The ANC squared off with the IEC and the MK party in Bloemfontein today. And we are unpacking this case and also its implications for the 2024 election on the 29th of May. We're joined also by the ANC's Mr. Sihle Zikalala as we continue to unpack this question. Mr. Zikalala, if I have you on the line, I wonder, I put some of the arguments that you made in court today to Mr. Ndlela of the MK party, but one of the criticisms today of the ANC's actions in court was that you had a window to object to the registration of the MK party and you didn't take advantage of that window and only raised your objection belatedly. Do you think there's any merit in that argument?
Now, while we would have loved to be there in the studio and engage directly, we take the opportunity to express ourselves. Firstly, that is a technical argument about the proceeding in court, and as the ANC, we have applied to the judge to hear our request. It is well known in this country and all over Africa that Umkhonto weSizwe was established by the ANC. It is the ANC military wing that was established to launch the campaign of the armed struggle as one pillar of the struggle against apartheid. So it has been seen that in the previous years, many breakaway parties have sought to appropriate the heritage of the ANC so that they project themselves as standing for the people of this country. That is opportunistic and very wrong. And that's why as the ANC, we will not leave this matter unattended, and we are going to challenge it.
Okay, let's put that to Mr. Ndlela. Of course, this case wasn't about the name and the logo, but Mr. Zikalala does raise this question of the appropriation of MK symbols and ANC symbols. What's your response to that?
No, unfortunately, Mr. Zikalala is very selective in his historical facts. The ANC was disbanded in 1960, and the ANC was for the natives. The ANC never had any colored people, never had any blacks. It was natives that led the ANC at that point in time and was disbanded by the apartheid government in the same way that this current ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa is trying to disband the will of the people, as was the case with the ANC that was disbanded by the apartheid government. So they're using apartheid-led tendencies that were used against the ANC then. Now, what then happened is that Umkhonto weSizwe was then formed, and let's be clear, Umkhonto weSizwe is the spear of the nation. It means exactly that. The aim was for Umkhonto weSizwe as a military wing, which, by the way, he forgets to mention that the ANC had wanted nothing to do with Umkhonto we Sizwe, where, they didn't want to be associated with any acts of violence at the time. Because at the time, President Mandela and President and Comrade Joe Slovo at the time decided to set up Umkhonto we Sizwe military wing, to take up arms against the apartheid government that had disbanded the ANC. Today, we're saying we have formed Umkhonto we Sizwe party that is going to take back the country by way of the ballot. Now, Umkhonto we Sizwe, the military wing at the time, was open to civil society. So you didn't have to be a member of the ANC to be part of Umkhonto we Sizwe, but you could also be a member of the ANC, as was the case with President Mandela, who then joined Umkhonto we Sizwe. So, this is very synonymous with what happened in history, where Umkhonto we Sizwe today is saying it doesn't matter what color you are, what creed or background or ethnic group you come from. As a South African that is patriotic, we want you to win back this country from this ANC that is captured of Cyril Ramaphosa.
Right.
That's just
Okay. Mr. Zikalala, let me give you an opportunity to respond there. That's MK's position. How do you respond to that?
Well, let me firstly tell you that history is history and cannot be changed today. I know a place where the ANC and EC discussed the formation of Umkhonto we Sizwe, and that is in KwaDukuza. That happened because Chief Albert Luthuli could not go out of the Stanger Magistrate Court. Hence, the NEC of the ANC met just outside KwaDukuza, and it was the farm area owned by some colored family of Bounded. The Congress movement met after that meeting, subsequently up that farm, and reaffirmed the decision. So the decision to form Umkhonto we Sizwe, historically, it's recorded that it was taken by the ANC. All people who joined Umkhonto we Sizwe were leaders of the ANC. It is unfortunate that Zuma have peddled lies, including that those that now are spread by the likes of Mr. Ndlela. There is no ANC of an individual. When Nelson Mandela led the ANC was not belonging to him. When Tambo led the ANC, it was not Tambo's ANC. Even Luthuli never said the ANC belonged to him. If Zuma thought that when he was the president of the ANC belonged to him, it would be wrong. He can have possession of individuals, the bunch of individuals who group themselves under himself and think that he is their godfather, that would be fine. But the ANC is not an organization that belongs to any leader. President Ramaphosa is a president of the ANC, the movement, not that he owns the ANC. It would be wrong for anyone to say it is the ANC of Ramaphosa.
And I will give you another chance to respond, Mr. Zikalala, as we have quite a few more minutes this evening. But Mr. Ndlela, the point made is that there's a deep historical link between the ANC and MK through its leaders, and that the ANC has ultimate ownership of this idea and movement.
No. Well, it's very disingenuous of Mr. Zikalala to talk about an MK that was disbanded, the military wing, and an MK military veterans that was disbanded by this Cyril Ramaphosa-led ANC. So, that's what I'm saying. There are certain acts here which we can clearly say, I draw direct parallel of the Cyril Ramaphosa-led ANC to that of apartheid acts, where they now want to take us to court as civil society, civil activists, and try and say that, our godfather. Yes, President Zuma is the only leader that we can trust because he's got referenceability. Under President Zuma, we had no load shedding. load shedding ended. There was no water shedding. There was free education that was initiated. So the Cyril Ramaphosa-led government and ANC, of which he and quite honestly, blind supporters like Mr. Zigalala, who know very well that even in his job right now, Mr. Zigalala knows this ANC is not ANC. He just doesn't want to say it. It's no longer the ANC that we know. It is totally detached from the people. The people do not recognize this country anymore. People's dignity is gone. So let's stop the politicking, Mr. Zigalala, and focus on the reality of the status quo of this country. Your great-grandchildren, Mr. Zigalala. If this country were to continue under this...
I don't agree with you at all. You are wrong.
I will give you an opportunity to respond, Mr. Zigalala.
You don't have to agree with the truth.
Right.
The reality. And what you're seeing here is a movement of inevitability that's leading to you waking up from your slumber and making sure that you deliver according to the people's needs.
Okay.
You are totally detached. You focus on politics more than you focus on social activism and making sure that people in this country are taken care of. That's your job to do.
Mr. Zigalala, let me give you a chance to respond.
Firstly, Mr. Ndlela himself is not known of any contribution in the revolution of South Africa. If he was in the MK, he must tell us his own force number, his commander, the camp commander and the commissar. He must first tell us that if he was ever in the MK or in the revolution in South Africa. But having said that, he's alluding to a number of issues which are socio-economic challenges that are facing this country. Number of these socio-economic challenges started under the leadership of President Zuma. They are not of our creation as the ANC. They are the legacy of historical injustice arising from the apartheid era. And therefore, it cannot be said it is a problem of the current leadership of the ANC. If he's saying the ANC is detached from the people, many people who never voted for the ANC are the people who never voted under Zuma himself. So that detachment must be clarified because the dwindling electoral support started in 2009 under President Zuma. We have been avoiding to tell these issues to him, and we have been raising in meetings with him directly but not publicly because he has been in the ANC. But we are free to raise those issues now because we have had a lot of engagement about his leadership as an individual. So we would not want to venture on that. But the distortion of the factual situation of South Africa today cannot be unchallenged. For instance, if you talk about economy of this country and the radical economic transformation, I'm the one person who was a premier and introduced a number of programs that talks to radical economic transformation, including set-aside, including clear policies that were about empowerment, localization.
Okay.
And that was stopped because of the leadership of Mr. Zuma at that time at the helm of our country said that was not allowed according to procurement framework. So let no one come and fabricate issues here.
Let's go to a break, Mr. Zigalala and Mr. Ndlela, and I promise you and our audience that we will continue this fiery debate between the ANC and the MK party after they squared off in court earlier today. After this, stick with us. Welcome back to Unfiltered. This evening, we're talking about the court battle between the ANC, the IEC, and MK that ensued earlier today in Bloemfontein. And we have a debate between senior members of the ANC and MK, Mr. Sihle Zigalala on the one hand of the ANC and Mr. Ntlamulo Ndlela, who have been discussing the case, but also wider questions surrounding the election. Mr. Ndlela, can I come to you? When we went to the break, your struggle credentials were questioned, and also the link that you drew between the economic situation and the tenure of Cyril Ramaphosa was also linked to the tenure of former President Zuma. Your response?
Well, my response is I don't need struggle credentials to be patriotic to this country. I think we need to understand that we're first citizens of this country before we're actually members of any political party. That's one thing that we need to be clear. And that's why, whilst within the still ANC, where they still use the framework of politicism, where they're totally detached, it's based on positions and how much power you have and how much money you can amass for yourself. We're focusing on a framework that looks at a civil activism, one that is for the people and with the people. So I don't need credentials. I mean, the mere fact that we've received such a resounding response from the public with Nhlamulo as a spokesperson and a leader in the core of this party, and the support we're getting is a clear indication that people are tired of politics. People don't eat politics, Mr. Zigalala. People are tired of 6,800 hours in 2023 of load shedding, Mr. Zigalala. 77 murders a day, Mr. Zigalala. 2.2 million people living in shacks, Mr. Zigalala. Some of which certain things happened when you were even a premier. Where today, even the people that were displaced from the floods still don't have homes, Mr. Zigalala. So don't ask me about my credentials. It doesn't matter. I'm a member of a political party that doesn't need me to have credentials. It just needs me to be an honest leader that wants to focus on changing this country. That's what's most important. I mean, here's the reality. The JSE has shown shares, huge share equity share growth off the back of poverty. And who's benefiting from the JSE, Mr. Zigalala? White-owned companies that you guys within the ANC rub shoulders with, that you can instruct to close people's bank accounts. That's the reality of what is the problem with your politicism and your credentials, Mr. Zigalala. Therein lies the problem. The mere fact that you can even ask me about credentials in this day and age when children that you refer to as Tinsola that has to wake up at 4 a.m. being a foster care child, not knowing if she's even got bread or even butter to give to her siblings. 4 a.m. because the mom and dad probably had to go to work, or maybe they're just children of a single parent. Having to get into a taxi from your 350, Mrs. Zigalala, to take her sibling, a girl child, to school, only to find herself, Mrs. Zigalala, being possibly prone, because as I mentioned, there's 77 murders a day, to a potential murder or a rape in this country of yours that is infested with crime, Mr. Zigalala, whilst you busy politic about my credentials. And chances are, she may even find herself in a taxi using the same 350. By the way, the fuel price would have increased, and maybe that 350 won't even help her get her to school, or maybe a peace job, Mrs. Zigalala. And she may that taxi may just hit a pothole and she ends up in hospital. Hello? It's a public hospital with no infrastructure, Mr. Zigalala.
Right.
That's the situation in this country. It has even lost 48%. The rand has lost 48% of its value.
Right.
Since Ramaphosa took over. So, Mr. Zigalala,
let me bring Mr. Zigalala in there. Mr. Zigalala, Mr. Ndlela puts to you that the economic situation is dire and has worsened over time, and that we are in a particularly difficult economic position right now. What's your response to that?
Let us start from what is being contested in court, because this discussion is about the matter that is in court. They claim that they are incontrovertible. What I can prove for you is that there is a bunch of opportunists who have no association with Umkhonto at all. He has confessed here, Mr. Ndlela, that he has no strong credentials. He knows no revolution. He has not been in Umkhonto. He has no background even in the ANC. We have been in this movement. We know Umkhonto and would not want to venture much on that. But it is not about credentials. We ask about their background so that we know their commitment into the struggle of liberation. It is clear that these are not takers or people who are agitating for change. They've been nowhere before. They've never fought for liberation. They are just opportunists. They see that the political office now comes with particular benefits. Like Mr. Zuma himself, he is angry because he's no longer a president of the country. His survival has been about being the president of the country. This is nothing but a political oligarchy. If you talk about a political oligarchy, you talk about someone who believes that his life is intertwined with a particular political office. He regards the political office not as a platform to serve the people, but as a platform to enrich himself and his survival. Now that must be firstly clarified. Secondly, the challenges that is mentioning, the crime got worsened under Zuma. The situation of the failure of the system, the administrative system of this country, happened under Zuma. This is what we are correcting now. If you will see, the jobs that are created today are increasing more than the jobs that were created 5 years or 10 years ago. And if you will see, the interventions to support small business today are more benefiting to small entrepreneurs than that time of Zoom. These are nothing but a bunch of individuals who are hell-bent in just serving themselves. That is their case. They are not known. A person who's known is Zuma. And therefore, all of them are using Zuma's coach. They are behind him. He is the one who is known, and therefore they all want to be in the political office to serve or to benefit themselves.
Right, Mr. Zigalala.
In the struggle. They've never struggled.
Mr. Zigalala, can I ask you this?
Of the revolution.
Can I ask you this? And I will, for fairness, also put a question to Mr. Ndlela as well. But I hear you talking about the Zuma era and the Zuma regime being troublesome for the country. Why didn't you say that then?
Yes, I have said this. We have raised these issues with Zuma inside the ANC at that time.
But you didn't say it publicly then.
We have raised it with him as a leader of the ANC. In the ANC, you have the principle of engaging internally before you go outside. Now, they stand outside, they go outside the engagement and portray as if they were not there. Zuma has always been in government. He's one person who has served government until he has been just removed recently.
Okay.
So he must not opportunistically come and say he is better because he has had more than 9 years to lead this country.
Right, let me put that to Mr. Ndlela. Of course, you can respond. Of course, you can respond. Mr. Zigalala, I must, in fairness, allow him to respond to your point. I've allowed you the floor for a number of minutes. I will come back to you. We've got another segment after this, but I, in fairness, must ask Mr. Ndlela to respond, and then you'll be allowed to respond thereafter. Can I just put this to you as well, Mr. Ndlela, before, of course, you can respond how you choose, but there is a question about the fact that former President Zuma actually was the president of South Africa for 9 years and had an opportunity to really reshape the country to address poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And I suppose the question that is asked of MK Party is, if he wasn't able to reverse those trends then, how will he be able, and how will the MK Party, under his support, be able to do it now?
I mean, again, I'll repeat the fact that it's disingenuous of Mr. Zigalala to think that under President Zuma, this country was the same as what it is under Cyril-led government. I mean, President Zuma built hospitals. President Zuma built universities. Under President Zuma, we had infrastructure that worked. We had trains that moved. That's the reality. What has happened under Cyril? Everything is dilapidated. Eskom is being sold. I mean, we talk about small businesses. He's talking about small businesses. In order to start small businesses, you need lights, Mr. Zigalala. The vortex of the momentum for any country is small business, but the backbone thereof is electricity. So you need electricity, which is a key factor and a key contributing factor to this country's economy, of which why we find ourselves in this situation. On top of that, you are sitting with a 300 billion rand deficit because of you spending monies on IPP, spending monies on diesel, spending monies on frivolous things instead of ensuring that there's proper infrastructure that will actually ensure that the money comes back in this country by virtue of the likes of your Transnet. You're trying to sell our ports. Let me touch on another thing.
Mr. Ndlela, I'm sorry.
It's important that I touch on the credentials matter.
I'm told we only have 3 minutes left. I do apologize. This debate has been so interesting that we've run out of time. But I want to give Mr. Zikalala a final chance to respond, and then we'll have to close off the show.
Yes, thank you. As you close, let's start from the primary objective of this discussion. It's what is obtaining now in the court. Mr. Ndlela agrees that he himself is not a member of MK. They are just a bunch of individuals who have grouped themselves around President Zuma. They are using his status for a political office. They want to occupy positions as members of parliament and members of legislatures because they just want to benefit. There's been nowhere in the struggle of the people of South Africa. They are just imagine now mushrooming through Zuma. And that is what we define as using Zuma as godfather for opportunists in this country.
And we're going to have to leave it there, Mr. Zikalala and Mr. Ndlela. I apologize for having to wrap up the debate relatively quickly, but we have run out of time.
I would have loved to be in the studio for this discussion.
We would have loved to have you, Mr. Zikalala, very much, and we did reach out to the party, but we're very grateful that you made time to call in, and we thank you for that. Mr. Ndlela, thank you.
Who are grouping themselves behind Zuma.
Mr. Zikalala,
thank you.
Thank you very much. We have heard you, Mr. Ndlela. Thank you very much for joining us as well. And thank you for joining us for this conversation on Unfiltered. It's been a fascinating debate between the MK party and the ANC, right at the center of our politics right now. Let's continue this conversation on social media, no doubt, at Unfiltered SABC. And thanks for joining us for another installment of Unfiltered News, Unfiltered Views, and Unfiltered Conversations. Good night.